The warm autumn sun cast long shadows across our driveway as Emma and I loaded up the car. She was bubbling with excitement, her auburn hair catching the light as she swung her shopping bag over her shoulder. At 17, Emma had mastered the art of multitasking, texting her friends, organizing her day, and somehow still making me laugh with her quick wit. "You've got the list, right?" I asked, jingling the car keys. "Yup." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her bag and read it off dramatically. "Shoes for the dance, earrings, and, oh yeah, Mom said to grab some milk. Apparently, we're out. Again." I grinned. "Your mom sure knows how to keep me in line." Emma rolled her eyes but smiled, her youthful energy infectious. I glanced back at the house where Laura, my wife, stood in the doorway with a small wave. Beside her, Emma's boyfriend Caleb leaned casually against the porch railing. He had the easy confidence of an 18-year-old, a mop of blonde hair, a skateboarder's build, and a smile that seemed to charm everyone he met. "They'll be fine," Emma said, noticing my lingering gaze. "Mom loves having someone to geek out over video games with." I nodded. Caleb had shown up earlier that day with a backpack full of gaming gear, ready to spend the afternoon diving into whatever virtual world he and Laura were obsessed with. Not my thing, but I appreciated how it gave them a chance to bond. "All right, mana potions and boss battles for them," I said as we buckled in. "And shopping for us." Emma laughed, her voice warm and carefree, and for a moment, everything felt right. The drive to the mall was filled with our usual banter, her teasing me about my questionable taste in music, me warning her not to blow all her babysitting money in one place. When we arrived, the scent of pretzels and roasted nuts filled the air as we joined the throngs of weekend shoppers. "First stop, shoes," Emma declared, marching ahead. I followed with a mix of pride and amusement, happy to play the role of dad/bag carrier. Watching her try on glittery heels and debate over which earrings would best match her dress brought a quiet joy. These were the moments I cherished, simple, everyday moments that reminded me how fast she was growing up. "You think these are too much?" she asked, holding up a pair of star-shaped earrings. I tilted my head, pretending to ponder. "Aren't you supposed to let the shoes steal the show?" Emma nodded, placing the earrings back with a decisive smile. "Good call, Dad." The afternoon passed in this rhythm of decisions and debates, punctuated by ice cream and laughter. By the time we left, Emma had found everything she needed, and we even remembered the milk. "Mom's gonna be jealous when she sees this," Emma joked as she licked her cone. "She'll get over it," I replied. "Especially when she sees the milk. That woman and her coffee." We laughed as we pulled into the driveway, the house bathed in the golden glow of dusk. Everything seemed perfectly normal as Emma bounded toward the front door, bags swinging in her hands. "I bet they're still arguing over who's the best character," she called over her shoulder. I chuckled, following close behind. But as soon as we stepped inside, something felt off. The house was eerily quiet. No hum of the game console, no laughter or banter. Just the faint sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "Mom. Caleb." I called out, setting the bags down on the counter. Emma looked at me, her brow furrowed. "That's weird. They should have heard us." We moved toward the kitchen together, Emma leading the way. And then we saw it. Laura. My wife. My partner of 20 years. Caleb. My daughter's boyfriend. Locked in a kiss so intimate, so consuming, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I froze. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, my body rooted to the spot. Then I felt the ceramic coffee mug in my hand. Without thinking, I threw it to the floor, the sound of it shattering cutting through the silence like a gunshot. Laura and Caleb sprang apart, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. Emma's gasp was sharp and raw, her voice trembling as she broke the silence. "What the hell is going on?" Neither of them answered. I couldn't speak. My chest tightened with a storm of anger, disbelief, and betrayal. I looked at Laura, hoping, praying, for some explanation that would make this all go away. But she just stood there, her mouth opening and closing as if words would somehow fix what we had just witnessed. Emma turned to me, her eyes wide with confusion and pain. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm for her sake. "Go to your room, Emma," I said quietly, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Dad." "Now," I barked, sharper than I intended. She flinched but obeyed, rushing up the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the suffocating silence. I turned back to Laura and Caleb. The tension in the room was unbearable, the weight of betrayal hanging heavy in the air. And as I stared at the woman I thought I knew and the boy I had welcomed into my home, one thought thundered in my mind: what have I just walked into? I didn't move for a long time, just stood there in the kitchen, staring at the two people who had shattered my world. The silence felt like it could swallow me whole, broken only by the distant sound of Emma's door slamming upstairs. Laura tried to say something. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, like she thought there was a chance to explain this. Caleb, on the other hand, wouldn't even look at me. He stood there like a guilty child caught stealing cookies, his hands jammed into his hoodie pockets. What the hell is this? My voice came out low and sharp, more dangerous than if I'd shouted. Thomas, Laura started, but she didn't finish. You what, Laura? I snapped, my hands trembling as I pointed at her and then at Caleb. You thought this was okay? This? My wife and my daughter's boyfriend? Caleb finally looked up, his face pale and panicked. It's not what it looks like, Mr. Anders. I laughed bitterly. Oh really? Then by all means, Caleb, enlighten me. What exactly am I looking at? He stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Laura cut him off, stepping forward like she could somehow fix this. Thomas, please, she said, her voice shaking. It's not what you think. I wasn't. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't. Just don't. I don't want to hear your excuses. I want the truth. She hesitated, her eyes darting to Caleb and then back to me. That hesitation, just that moment of silence, was enough to confirm what I already knew. How long? I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. Laura's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. It wasn't. It just happened, Thomas. It's not. How long? I demanded, my voice rising. Caleb stepped back like I'd hit him, his back bumping into the counter. Laura started crying now, but I wasn't about to let her tears sway me. 2 months, she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. For a moment, the air left my lungs. 2 months. 2 months of lying to my face. 2 months of sitting across from me at dinner, acting like everything was fine. 2 months of letting Emma bring this kid into our home, under our roof. I turned to Caleb, and he flinched under my glare. Get out. Mr. Anders, Out. I roared, and my voice echoed through the house. Caleb didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the door, nearly tripping over himself as he grabbed his backpack and ran out. The sound of the door slamming shut behind him was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. That left me alone with Laura. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself, crying softly. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You don't get to cry, I said, my voice cold. You don't get to act like the victim here. You did this. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was stupid, Anne. Stupid? I interrupted, my anger boiling over again. You think this was just stupid? This isn't forgetting to lock the front door, Laura. This is. I don't even have words for what this is. She wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. It was a mistake, Thomas. I swear. It didn't mean anything. That's supposed to make it better. I snapped. It didn't mean anything. So what, you just threw away our marriage, hurt our daughter, for nothing. I wasn't thinking, she said, her voice trembling. I was lonely, Thomas. You've been so distant lately, Anne. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. So this is my fault. You're blaming me for this? No, she said quickly, stepping closer. That's not what I mean. I've felt invisible, Thomas. Like you don't see me anymore. Invisible? I shook my head in disbelief. You were so invisible that you thought the best way to feel seen was to hook up with a kid who isn't even out of high school yet? My daughter's boyfriend? Are you serious? Laura looked down, her shoulders shaking as she cried harder. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe. But then I thought about Emma, upstairs in her room, probably crying her eyes out, and any sympathy I had disappeared. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you even realize what you've done? How this is going to affect Emma? How am I supposed to explain this to her? To anyone? Laura didn't answer. She just stood there, looking small and broken, like a child caught in a lie. I can't do this right now, I said finally, shaking my head. I can't even look at you. Thomas, please, she said, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said, my voice firm. Don't touch me. She dropped her hands, her face crumpling. I'm going to check on Emma, I said, my voice like ice. And when I come back down, you'd better have a damn good reason for why I shouldn't pack my bags and walk out that door. Then I turned and left the kitchen, leaving Laura alone with the wreckage of what she'd done. As I climbed the stairs, my legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to carry me to Emma's room. I didn't know what I was going to say to her. How do you comfort your child after she's seen something like that? All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. I stood outside Emma's room, my hand hovering over the door. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to knock. How could I face her? How could I tell her that the people she trusted most had betrayed her in ways I could barely comprehend myself? But she needed me. I had to pull it together, for her. I knocked softly. Emma? Can I come in? There was a pause, and then her muffled voice came through the door, shaky and raw. Yeah. I opened the door and found her sitting on the bed, hugging a pillow to her chest. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red and puffy. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and it broke something inside me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to keep some space between us. Hey, kiddo, I said softly. Emma didn't look at me. She just stared at the floor, her fingers gripping the pillow like it was the only thing holding her together. I'm so sorry, I said after a moment. You shouldn't have had to see that. She sniffled, wiping at her eyes. I don't understand, Dad. How could Mom do that? And Caleb, her voice cracked, and she buried her face in the pillow. I reached out, hesitating for a second before placing a hand on her shoulder. I don't have a good answer for that, Em. What they did, it's wrong. There's no excuse for it. She looked up at me then, her face a mix of anger and heartbreak. Did you know? Did you have any idea? The question stung, but I shook my head. No. I didn't see it coming. If I had, I would've. I don't know what I would have done. But I never would have let you get hurt like this. Emma nodded, her lip trembling. I feel so stupid. I mean, how could I not see it? Caleb was. God, he was my boyfriend. And Mom? I don't even know who she is anymore. Hey, I said firmly, turning to face her. This isn't your fault. Not one bit. Caleb and your mom made their choices, and those choices are on them. Not you. Emma let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. What do I do now? I mean, I can't even look at Caleb. And Mom, she trailed off, her voice barely a whisper. I felt the weight of her words settle on me like a lead blanket. I'd been so focused on my own anger, my own betrayal, that I hadn't thought about what this meant for Emma. She'd lost her boyfriend and, in a way, her mother too, all in one afternoon. You don't have to do anything right now, I said gently. But you do need to cut Caleb out of your life. Completely. He doesn't deserve you, Emma. Not after this. She nodded slowly, her grip on the pillow loosening. I know. I thought I loved him, you know. My chest tightened. I know, kiddo. And it's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to feel angry. But don't let him or what he did take more from you than he already has. You deserve better. Emma sniffled again, but this time, there was a spark of determination in her eyes. You're right. Screw him. He's not worth it. That's my girl, I said, a small smile breaking through the storm of emotions. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the situation still heavy but feeling just a little more bearable. Dad, Emma said after a while, her voice quiet. What are you going to do about Mom? I let out a long sigh, rubbing the back of my neck. I don't know yet. But I can't just let this slide. What she did, it's not something you come back from easily. If at all. Emma looked at me, her expression serious. You shouldn't forgive her, Dad. She doesn't deserve it. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't that simple. That marriage, family, was messy and complicated. But in that moment, all I could think about was protecting her, making sure she felt safe and loved. You might be right, I said finally. And if it comes to that, we'll figure it out. Together. Emma gave a small nod, her hand reaching out to squeeze mine. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt like an anchor, grounding me in a sea of uncertainty. After a while, I stood up. You should try to get some rest. I'll be downstairs if you need me. Emma gave me a faint smile. Thanks, Dad. I closed her door gently behind me and made my way downstairs, where Laura was still sitting in the kitchen. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes swollen from crying. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady but firm. Thomas, please, she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. I don't want to hear any more excuses. You crossed a line, Laura. A line I don't know if we can come back from. Right now, my priority is Emma. And if that means you need to leave this house, then so be it. Her face crumpled, but I didn't waver. For the first time in years, I felt like I had absolute clarity about what I needed to do. Thomas, I love you, she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. No, Laura. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. And now you have to live with the consequences. The words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I saw the weight of what she'd done fully hit her. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure, I was going to protect my daughter, no matter what. The following morning felt like a fragile truce. The air in the house was heavy, and the conversations were minimal. I tried to keep busy, tinkering in the garage while Emma stayed upstairs in her room. Laura hadn't come down since last night, and honestly, I preferred it that way. By mid-afternoon, just as I thought I could get through a day without another confrontation, I saw him. Caleb. He pulled into the driveway in his rusted old car, stepping out with a bouquet of pink roses in hand. My stomach tightened with anger and disbelief. What the hell is he doing here? I muttered to myself, wiping my hands on a rag and heading toward the door. Emma must have heard the car too because she came down the stairs, her face darkening as she saw Caleb standing outside. Dad, don't let him in, she said, her voice tight. I nodded. Don't worry. I've got this. But before I could reach the door, Caleb knocked, his expression a mix of nervousness and determination. I opened the door just enough to step outside and block his view of Emma. Caleb, I said, my voice low and firm. What do you think you're doing here? Mr. Anders, he began, holding up the bouquet like a shield. I just wanted to apologize. To you, to Emma, and to Mrs. Anders. I know I screwed up, and I'm sorry. I really am. My jaw clenched as I stared him down. You think flowers and an apology are going to fix what you did? No, sir, he said quickly. But I love Emma, and I need her to know that. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I don't want to lose her. I almost laughed at the audacity. You lost her the moment you made that terrible mistake. Before he could respond, the door behind me swung open. Emma stepped out, her expression hard and unyielding. What do you want, Caleb? She asked coldly, crossing her arms. He turned to her, his face softening. Emma, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I don't know what I was thinking, but it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Emma's lips tightened into a thin line. A mistake? You think sleeping with my mom was just a mistake? I wasn't thinking, Caleb stammered, his face pale. I love you, Emma. You have to believe that. She stared at him for a moment, then stepped forward and snatched the bouquet out of his hands. You love me, she said, her voice rising. You sure have a funny way of showing it, Caleb. Before he could respond, Emma hurled the flowers onto the lawn, the petals scattering in the breeze. I'm done with you, she said, her voice shaking with anger. I don't ever want to see you again. Get out of here. Emma, please, he said, taking a step toward her. I said get out, she screamed, her voice cracking as tears welled in her eyes. Caleb hesitated for a moment, his face crumpling with defeat. Then he turned and walked back to his car, his head hanging low. The sound of his car starting and driving away was the only noise as Emma stood there, her shoulders heaving with emotion. I stepped closer, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," I said softly. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I'm not going to let him hurt me again." "Good," I said. "You're stronger than he ever deserved." Emma went back inside, leaving me alone on the porch. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool afternoon air, before going back inside to deal with the next chapter of this mess. I found Laura in the guest room, sitting on the bed with a suitcase open beside her. She looked up as I entered, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Thomas, please," she said, standing up. "Can we just talk? I know I messed up, but—" I held up a hand to stop her. "No more excuses, Laura. No more apologies. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this is over," I said, my voice steady. "I want a divorce." She shook her head, her hands clasped together like she was begging. "Thomas, we've been through so much. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, anything. Just, don't give up on us." I stared at her, the woman I had spent so many years with, and felt nothing but a hollow ache. "You gave up on us the moment you betrayed me and our daughter. There's no coming back from that." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank back onto the bed, her face buried in her hands. "You have until the end of the week to pack your things," I said, my tone cold. "After that, I want you gone." Laura didn't respond, and I turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Emma, sharing a quiet dinner. The house felt emptier than ever, but there was a strange sense of peace too. "Are you okay?" I asked her as we cleared the dishes. She nodded. "I think so. It still hurts, but I'm glad he's gone." "And Mom?" "I don't know." I put an arm around her shoulder. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it. Just the two of us." Emma smiled faintly, leaning into me. "Thanks, Dad. For everything." As we sat together, I realized that while everything in our lives had been turned upside down, we still had each other. And that was enough to start rebuilding. The week passed in a blur of tension and finality. Laura packed her belongings with a kind of quiet resignation, never once pushing back against my decision. Emma kept her distance, refusing to engage with her mother beyond a clipped word or two. I did my best to keep the atmosphere in the house calm, but it was like walking on a razor's edge. The day Laura left, she paused at the door, her suitcase in one hand, her eyes fixed on me. "Thomas," she said softly, "I know I can't undo what I've done. I just hope, someday, you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." I met her gaze, searching for something, regret, shame, or even understanding. But all I saw was a woman I no longer recognized, someone who had betrayed not just me, but our family. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Laura," I said, my voice steady. "But it's not here anymore." She hesitated, her lips parting as if she wanted to say more, but then she just nodded and walked out the door. The sound of her car driving away was a strange kind of relief, like the weight of her betrayal had finally lifted, leaving behind an open wound that might, just might, begin to heal. That evening, Emma and I sat on the back porch, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in days, she looked peaceful. "Do you think she'll come back?" Emma asked quietly. I shook my head. "No. And even if she does, it won't change anything." Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Good. I don't think I could handle it if she did." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't heavy or uncomfortable, but calm. "Healing. You know," I said, breaking the quiet, "it's just us now. Things are going to be different." Emma smiled faintly. "Different doesn't sound so bad." I smiled back, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "No, it doesn't." A month later, life had started to settle into a new rhythm. Emma and I found a balance. She focused on school and her friends, while I threw myself into work and making our house feel like a home again. But one evening, as I sorted through a stack of mail, I came across an envelope that stopped me cold. It was from Laura. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the envelope, before finally tearing it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it and read. "Thomas. I know I don't deserve to ask anything of you, but I need you to hear me out. I'm getting help, therapy, counseling, anything to understand why I did what I did. But no matter what, I'll always regret losing you and Emma. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If not, I understand. Laura. I stared at the letter for a long time, the words blurring as memories of the life we built together came rushing back. I didn't know if I'd ever want to talk to her again. Maybe someday, for Emma's sake, but not now. Not yet. I folded the letter and set it aside. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hate either. Just the quiet acceptance that some wounds take time to heal, and some scars never fully fade. That night, I sat in the living room, watching Emma laugh at a movie we'd seen a dozen times before. Her laughter was real, unforced, and it filled the room with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. "Dad," she said, turning to me with a smile, "thanks for everything. For being here. For being, you." I smiled, my chest swelling with pride and love. "I'm always here for you, kiddo. No matter what." As the credits rolled and the room fell quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was ours, and we were moving forward. Together. And that was enough.